Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dominick Domingo.
And I'm your co-host, Virginia Grenier.
We'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy some inspiring conversation. Here at Language of the Soul, we know that life is story. Individually, we're the products of the stories we tell about ourselves. Culture is the amalgamation of the stories we weave about the human condition. Here's the thing. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. Thanks for tuning in and joining in the march toward human potential. Chapter 6. Story and Belief. The Power of the Word. According to anthropologists, language has been around for nearly half of human history. In previous chapters, we've explored how our conceptual realm is inextricably linked to language, specifically the domain of ethics and morals. We've looked at how our individual worldviews and value systems synthesize to forge an overarching philosophical consensus. This sphere of norms, mores, institutions, codes, laws, and policy can be thought of as the status quo that's passed on through social conditioning. None of this would be possible without conceptual cognition, the juxtaposition of abstract ideas. This kind of reasoning, in turn, relies on language. I've suggested throughout this book that the evolution of this invisible realm, what Teilhard de Chardin dubbed our noosphere, is as crucial to our survival as that of our biology. Simply put, without tempering our base drives with ethics and morals, the human race would have long ago rendered itself extinct, competing for resources. With this in mind, how did the moral realm of ideas take the front seat to our biology? At what point in our evolution did our sophisticated brains step in to look out for us by curbing base tribal instincts that no longer served proliferation, persistence, and survival? As hinted at above, our noosphere was largely birthed with the advent of language. And all those new cutting-edge ideas begged to be expressed, reincarnated as it were, in the perceptual realm. Along came story. As long as language has been around, story has been the vehicle for expressing abstract ideas. Still, I would argue there was a moment in time when modern Judeo-Christian storytelling as we know it in the Western world was put on the fast track. Creation myths, parables that explain nature, and other forms discussed in earlier chapters were alive and well in oral tradition throughout prehistory and antiquity. But story as an expression of the human condition, as the handbook for life in the physical realm, may have its roots in distinct evolutionary milestones. The 2004 Time magazine article The God Gene posited that genetic predisposition alone accounted for the brain chemistry shared by our prophets and messiahs, that a particular balance of neurotransmitters gifted them an inclination to connect dots, to sense interconnectivity, and to project numinous significance on otherwise neutral events. Staunch empiricists have long dismissed meaning or profundity, leveling similar blows on creative geniuses, artists, and innovators who seem to have a direct line to the divine. In antiquity, oracles were not the sole conduits in possession of this postulated brain chemistry. So were the poets, rhapsodes, and playwrights who scribed their name in the stars. Storytellers were not just historians, but the keepers of the human condition. However you view our prophets and the storytellers who carved them a place in history, consider that our sophisticated nervous systems, the prefrontal cortex in particular, had evolved to the point of self-consciousness. It gave humans the ability to take a meta-view of the human condition and man's place in the universe. And things may have looked a bit grim. Messiahs like Christ, Buddha, and Muhammad surfaced during a relatively short window of time in our dialectic, and for very good reason. Their message of love and compassion was much needed. In case that characterization does not immediately land, perhaps framing the impasse in another way is in order. Their message was one of unity, an acknowledgement of the entanglement of every particle of the universe. Recognizing and holding this interconnectivity sacred would serve to prevent humankind not only from ravaging his own habitat by squandering resources, but from killing itself off by competing for them. My chosen word, love, has often been used interchangeably with God. God is love, the saying goes, in certain circles. It would be sophomoric to attempt reconciling man's infinite conceptions of God, from the ultimate creator, a personified daddy in the sky thumbing his long flowing beard, to the notion of God as an intelligent binding force. In modernism, God is often thought of as collective intelligence, the very universal force that propagates life. In a recent development, as an alternative to religious doctrine, intelligent design is now taught as part of many public school curricula. However one conceives or dismisses the concept of God, one thing is clear. At a certain point in human history, creation stories, polytheistic notions, and nods to the afterlife from antiquity quickly yielded to the idea of unity. Conduits, sages, thought leaders, and spiritual gurus appeared the world over to share this message of love that would redeem us from self-destruction. In essence, it promised to save us from ourselves by holding up a mirror to our interconnectivity. The idea that the human condition was not a purely physical state of being, but one involving a transcendent spiritual component, was nothing new. But this new model of it spread with startling efficiency, against great odds. Disciples of these messiahs and prophets spread the word through philosophy, wisdom tradition, and religion. Taking an evolutionary theory perspective, with the premise that all enduring societal institutions serve our proliferation in some way, it is logical to conclude that without tempering our base drives and tribal instincts, we would self-destruct. There is, of course, an argument to be made that things quickly went awry the moment institutionalized religion was used to control the populace and justify wars. But there is an equally compelling argument that the original message was hijacked to ill purpose. The intelligence that drives evolution coexists with many other forces, rendering dialectic a less than perfect science. Though many posit humans have evolved an internal moral compass, with or without a sacred handbook, it's daunting to imagine what would have transpired without the emergence of spiritual tradition. Even the most skeptical among us must acknowledge the fact that, at this moment in history, the human race inflicts less physical hand-to-hand violence on its own per capita than ever before. Harvard's Steven Pinker popularized this view in his 2011 book, The Better Angels of Our Nature: Why Violence Has Declined. More recently, however, anthropologist Rahul Oka at the University of Notre Dame has challenged the redeeming notion violence is on the decline. Those dead set on seeing the glass half empty will suggest violence has simply been subverted into oppression, marginalization, exploitation, slave trade, and human trafficking. Regardless, overt physical violence is at an all-time low, according to most anthropologists and sociologists. The bottom line is, survival instincts served humankind early on when man was still competing for a foothold. But base drives like scarcity mentality and competition for resources eventually led to a great deal of bloodshed and warfare that proved a dead-end road. Unmitigated, the base drives that propagated early nomadic tribes were poised to do us in, absent something more, something loftier. The thing is, the message of love that appeared in human dialectic is anything but a nightlight, a comforting notion designed to assign meaning to a dog-eat-dog world. It is more essential than the promise of order in chaos, or redemption in damnation. With the right goggles on, an intelligent binding force at the center of the universe may be the ultimate truth. Accepting metaphysical notions of spirituality may just be a matter of semantics. Consider that mechanistic Newtonian science has long sought to quantify the universe in terms of classical physics, quantum mechanics, cell biology, and even medicine. But we have yet to explain the observer effect. The very existence of a material universe is questionable at best, without an observer, without consciousness. Consider that on a cellular level, energetic forces trump chemical environmental factors when it comes to growth or protection responses. In other words, energetic signals take precedence over local chemical signaling through the cell wall. Locally, these signals originate from thoughts and feelings. But we are learning more every day about non-local energetic signaling. It may well turn out that collective consciousness, the intelligence that drives all life in the universe, is truly running the show. The way I put it is this: cell biology talks endlessly about how DNA is just a blueprint for life. Once a cell differentiates, it self-creates all day, every day. It creates enzymes, proteins, peptides, and even neurotransmitters by rearranging molecules. But few really talk about the intelligent force inherent in energetic signaling that shuttles those molecules around on an as-needed basis. Beyond a polite nod to dualism, mechanistic Newtonian science is not fond of acknowledging the ghost in the machine. If the idea of non-local energetic communication as consciousness is a leap for you, the reader, let me take a different tack. Consider quantum entanglement, the very principle that sets modern quantum mechanics apart from classical physics. In brief, particles entangled through physical interaction or common origins behave in an identical fashion, even when separated by great distance. The phenomenon suggests an interconnectivity between all particles of the universe since the Big Bang. For some, embracing the idea of God or love as a binding force is a matter of semantics. Traditionally, staunch empiricists resist dualistic notions of consciousness as anything other than a byproduct of biology. The idea of collective consciousness is an even harder pill to swallow for many. In my economy, quantum entanglement, along with the celebrated 100th monkey effect, make a strong case for intelligent, non-local communication via collective consciousness. Though controversial, the original findings are often misconstrued in popular culture. The 100th monkey effect refers to the mysterious appearance of new behaviors once a critical mass is reached in a given population, in gene pools that are geographically separate. However misunderstood, the phenomenon merits further research. After all, man once believed the world was flat. We discover startling new truths about the universe every day. To view our current understanding of it as anything more than the tip of a mysterious iceberg qualifies as pure hubris. Semantically speaking, when it comes to a universal binding force, the trick may lie in swapping out the word love, God, or collective intelligence for something more palatable, something more akin to energy, without the added personification of thought, will, or intent. Semantics is important here. Language has always proven insufficient to approximate the ineffable. I go back to my favorite quote from Decoding the Secret Patterns to Nature, in response to the nearly impeccable numbering of flower petals according to Fibonacci's celebrated numerical sequence. The question is posed: do flowers know math? The playful but insightful answer: they don't need to. They're the expression of it. Oh, the humanity! Our moral realm, conceptual in nature, evolved as a form of adaptation. It relied on abstract cognition, which was reliant on language. Clearly, there was an evolutionary advantage to evolving ideas. It could be said that seemingly redeeming human traits like altruism, kindness, bonding, affinity, and love are simply survival-based instincts that serve the persistence of the tribe. It could be said that we've simply given these inclinations fancy names, thanks to the gift of language. In the same way otherwise neutral physiological excitement in a dog, the wagging of a tail, is personified as happy, we characterize the universe's propagating force as love or God. But is this nothing more than applying lipstick to a pig? Man has always been fond of distinguishing himself from the rest of the animal kingdom. Better put, placing himself above other contenders, with a bit of dominion thrown in for good measure. It's been said that what separates us from animals is everything from our opposable thumbs to our ability to reason. Whether one takes an imperialist view or a symbiotic view of our place in the world, the metacognition, sentience, afforded higher mammals via the prefrontal cortex is a pretty sure frontrunner for what distinguishes us. Unconscious, instinctual responses are all our lizard brains are capable of repeating. But our prefrontal cortex has gifted us new responses to novel stimuli, the capacity to learn new behaviors and reactions, and hardwire them. Not only that, but we have the ability to assess our own impulses and temper them with intellect. In other words, to assert free will. For that reason, Though many seem to be cruising on autopilot, or obeying the lizard brain, if you will, mankind on the whole has spent a great deal of time navel-gazing about what makes us human. I'll suggest in this chapter that our penchant for attaching meaning to survival is uniquely human. I'll also argue that our moral conceptual realm on the whole distinguishes, if not elevates, the human race. It has yielded an inexhaustible domain as rich or richer than the perceptual domain. Man's loftier ideas comprise the aforementioned salvation from his baser nature. Counted among what have become known as Platonic values are notions like truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, and kindness. As values we aspire to, they are arguably what make us human. Even contradictions in terms like the ethics of war are distinctly human, as are the constitutional principles of personal liberty and equanimity we so often fall short of in the democratic experiment that is the United States. Our failure to embody what we aspire to is often dubbed human frailty, and it seems to be part and parcel of the human condition. With this in mind, it may well be that what makes us human is not the embodiment of Platonic values, but our undying penchant for aspiring to them. To be human, then, is to strive for redemption, to redeem sheer survival with meaning. The question becomes whether we are, in fact, sifting through chaos to glean the meaning in it, or simply attributing it. In either case, correlating meaning with survival is uniquely human. Religion does not have a monopoly on morals or ethics, nor does philosophy. Hopefully, if nothing else, the connection between language and the realm of ideas it availed is exceedingly clear. From the very origin of Homo sapiens, we have been stargazers, pondering our place in the universe. Spiritual tradition simply served as a catalyst for modern storytelling forms. But the fact remains, from oral tradition on, story has assessed the human condition and reflected it back. As often as not, story has taught us how to live in the world, with an eye on our potential for growth and evolution. How story stole the show. It's fair to speculate that life, pre-language, was largely experiential. Without language, abstract cognition was amorphous, lacking in form. Then along came the adaptive advantage of language, and everything changed. Our moral and ethical realm evolved precisely due to the advent of language. This innovation meant we could now arrange abstract concepts as subjects and predicates, symbolized by words, and juxtapose them in a logical way in order to draw new conclusions. We could take opposing ideas and synthesize them, leading to an exponential explosion of the conceptual domain. The floodgates were effectively opened. With this in mind, it could be argued that morals and ethics are synonymous with the tool of language. When language became the rote method to convey ideas or concepts, story was soon to follow. Story quickly became synonymous with the conceptual realm, morals and ethics in particular. It just so happens that in the course of human history, the juxtaposition of these ideas took figural form once again. From the moment God sported a long white beard and began creating the world in his image, parable, allegory, and fable became the expression of ideas. If it's human to infuse survival with meaning, storytellers and artists are the gatekeepers of it. We reveal the meaning and existence through word and image, providing the something more that lends it richness. Storytellers and artists reveal rare glimpses of the transcendent, the numinous, and the profound. In the ultimate irony, however, literary criticism has devoted itself to reinterpreting creative efforts to discern their relevance. When it comes to scripture, hermeneutics and exegesis sift through subjectivity and cultural relativity to arrive at the Word of God as channeled by mortal prophets. More often than not, however, what's canonized is the doctrine and dogma that serves power structures like institutionalized religion. Whether one sees our prophets and messiahs as conduits for universal truth, or just hacks who possess the brain chemistry described in Time magazine's article, The God Gene, their role in the course of human history is undeniable. Liturgical tradition and hermeneutics arguably formed the basis of modern literary criticism. Literary forms and sacred texts, like parable and allegory, were dissected as emblematic representations of not just the human condition, but man's place in the universe. They revealed startling truths about existence through simple metaphor. These truths spoke not only of the human condition, but of the true metaphysical nature of the universe. Perhaps more startling evidence of the universal truth Scripture reveals are the similarities that appear from one tradition to the next, often in cultures that had no contact with one another. The field of comparative religion has devoted itself to drawing parallels and identifying the common threads between religious traditions the world over. In The Hero with a Thousand Faces, comparative religion expert Joseph Campbell has compiled the Elemental Handbook for recurring templates that speak to our innate wiring for understanding the mechanics of the world in which we live. The chicken and the egg. Again. The relationship between concept and percept is reciprocal. We assign linguistic symbols to tangible forms while expressing abstract ideas through figurative images. In the same way, our ideas and our biology inform one another, perpetually. In other words, experience in the physical realm crafts the individual worldviews that collectively become consensus. In turn, this consensus is imparted through social conditioning, inculcating individuals once again. It's a vicious cycle. It may be helpful to employ a visual to this phenomenon. Picture an individual encoding all his life experiences on a thumb drive titled Worldview, then uploading it to a cloud titled Status Quo. Now picture the next generation downloading this status quo from the collective cloud through socialization. Finally, picture this cycle recurring ad infinitum. Human beings are the sole life forms to learn vicariously. All organisms encode life experience for survival, then pass on the database. Higher mammals, however, due to their sophisticated limbic systems, can augment the inherited instinctual responses of the lizard brain with novel responses learned through life experience. Though all organisms, quote, learn growth or protection responses to environmental stimuli, humans seem to be the sole species who can adopt beliefs through mere suggestion. From our friends and family, our educators, the media, and so on. Collectively, these influences constitute our social conditioning. From the moment we arrive on the planet, we are inculcated with ideas about the world, many of which severely limit potential. The uniquely human predilection of learning vicariously, adopting the perceptions of others, has its perks, but as often as not, the perceptions of others, let's call them beliefs for our purposes, can be ill-founded. Simply put, erroneous beliefs can be damaging, dangerous. Prejudice, bigotry, racism, and capitalist greed, for example, can have a counterproductive impact on our social evolution. Some schools of thought, like Hegel's dialectic, hold that all pendulum swings contribute to forward movement. Personally, I place great faith in the universal intelligence that drives moral evolution, but we all know regression when we see it. Think the Dark Ages, the rise of fascism during World War II, the Taliban, the Iranian Revolution, and the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Growing pains in human dialectic can be uncomfortable at best. For now, the connection I am offering is the one between beliefs, both personal and societal, and what they manifest. An understanding of this relationship may be gently nudging you, the reader, toward the premise of this chapter. If learned perceptions can be thought of as beliefs, the power of collective beliefs is immeasurable. Beliefs are contagious. They gather to form movements, trends, schools of thought, dogmas, ideologies, political platforms and parties, and so on. And when they take hold, the entire course of human history is redirected. If Marxism brought us Hitler and Christian doctrine fueled both the Crusades and the Inquisition, the power of ideas should be self-evident. The decades-long Cold War has been called the quintessence of ideological warfare. You, the reader, are likely already speculating about the role story plays in all of this. Even so, I will give you a hint. All these history-altering ideas were nothing more than stories we told about ourselves. Our examples of the Crusades and the Inquisition point to a popular sentiment that exemplifies the power of ideas alone. Most wars are fought over religion. It would seem all spiritual tradition is based in love and compassion, and yet, spirituality's seemingly evil twin, institutionalized religion, gets the bad rap. The caveat I use to explain this discrepancy is this. World leaders and institutionalized power structures categorically use the innate push button of religion to justify wars that are really about power, resources, or territory. Propaganda riles the requisite sentiment, be it the anti-communist sentiment of the Cold War or the anti-Muslim sentiment that was a red herring in the war against terror. Whether I've sufficiently exonerated spirituality is of no consequence. Let's not split hairs. The fact remains, ideas matter. Beliefs matter. Recap, tying it all together. On the microcosmic level, individuals map personal experience throughout life, weaving a tapestry we call a value system or worldview. On a macrocosmic level, collective human experience is woven into the status quo. The reciprocal function is ironic. The status quo is then downloaded again through social conditioning, determining the capacity and potential of the subsequent generation. It's mind-blowing to consider the impact social conditioning has on our collective potential, or conversely, our limitations. We are taught that man cannot fly, therefore he does not. It's as simple as that. Everything from aging equals falling apart to women are from Venus, men are from Mars, to the overrated view that life is a matter of survival of the fittest, determine how things will play out by those who adopt these notions. The powerful hold early development places on potential, both perceptions of the world and beliefs about it, is beautifully illustrated in a study conducted by neuroscientists David Hubble and Torsten Weisel. In it, groups of kittens were raised in two separate environments, one composed of vertical stripes and the other horizontal. When released from the environment in which they'd been raised, the group raised with only horizontally striped wallpaper simply could not perceive vertical objects and found themselves running into chairs and table legs. Similarly, the other group were blind to horizontal forms like seat cushions they would otherwise lounge on. The world is a stage. The bulk of this book has been devoted to exploring how the individual transforms through storytelling, and by extension, how society evolves collectively. We've examined the mechanics of personal transformation, from its chemical basis to the phenomenon of catharsis. But how exactly do individual subjective worldviews and value systems become the status quo on the macro scale? What are the mechanics of this process? The one that forges the universal thought forms and paradigms that open the door to human potential, or conversely, severely limit our capacity. How does personal experience become belief? And how do personal beliefs become widespread paradigms, norms, mores, and even policy? More germane to the spirit of this book, how does story impact all of this? As touched on earlier, belief plays an immeasurable role in what manifests, both individually and collectively, with the premise that the evolution of our moral realm, our ideas, is as crucial to the survival of the human race as that of our biology. Transformation is crucial. All organisms, when faced with adverse conditions, exhibit one of two responses: growth or protection. Further, that which stops growing, or in the case of humans, learning and evolving, begins to die. Hardcore Darwinians regularly remind us that we must adapt or die. The logical conclusion is that our ideas, thought forms, and paradigms are not exempt from the rules of our biology and must evolve in kind. Further, the two are inextricably linked. In his book, The Biology of Belief, cell biologist Bruce Lipton points out that belief directly impacts biology structurally. Lipton, 2015. This premise is not esoteric, fringe, or out there. It is evidenced in no uncertain scientific terms. To cite one bit of evidence, plenty to come, consider this. The aforementioned growth or protection response to environmental factors is well documented. Imagine a scenario in which a cell is locally exposed to a chemical stimulus like histamine through the cell wall. It creates a protective response. This protective response will always be trumped by a growth response in the presence of adrenaline generated by the brain. The energetic signaling of the limbic system will always take precedence over local signaling. Now let's replace the phrase energetic signaling from the nervous system with thoughts and feelings. It should be clear that free will, fueled by the sum of our beliefs, wins out every time when it comes to our biology. We are simply wired that way. It's worth noting that a growth response correlates with love, whereas a protective response is fear-based. The fight-or-flight response generates the cortisol and adrenaline that can tax health if chronic, or fuel anything from a soccer riot to full-scale war. In previous chapters, we've explored how our wiring for metaphor has ensured that we learn more in the narrative realm than the didactic. In other words, the mapping of highly emotional experiences on our respective worldviews means that the vicarious experience of partaking in story is more effective than persuasion in shifting personal paradigms. We've explored the countless ways that we're all products of the stories to which we've been exposed. I've suggested that collectively, society is the sum of its history. Now let's look into the means by which personal experience translates into the status quo. Those values, thought forms, paradigms, schools of thought, codes, dogmas, and doctrines we adopt and pass on to future generations. How does personal experience translate into universal experience? How do personal beliefs propagate and capture public imagination? Or put another way, how do individuals impact the course of human history, actively or passively? Imagine the spreading of pollen by bees from one flower to another. On a grassroots level, we spread ideas passively in casual water cooler conversations in the workplace. We spread them gossiping in the fellowship hall at church, the line at the supermarket, even in bed at night as we replay daily events to our spouses. In a broader sense, beliefs are spread through parental guidance, education, religious doctrine, work practices, media, and advertising. Our leaders proffer ideologies through political propaganda. News organizations, in turn, perpetuate it via talking heads and political pundits. Beliefs spread effortlessly in pop culture, through song lyrics and cinematic dialogue and even still images, in all genres and formats of media. One of the more recent platforms, but perhaps the one with the strongest influence, is social media. Viral videos from Instagram influencers have unprecedented reach, traveling at lightning speed. Now imagine that the bees in our metaphor are mosquitoes, and what's being spread is not life-giving pollen, but the plague. Such is the potential danger of the propagation of belief, and such is the cautionary tale of this chapter. As mentioned before, all life forms, from single-celled organisms to more complex multicellular organisms, hardwire experience. The lexicon of innate or instinctual responses is regularly augmented with learned biological responses to environmental influences. Still, Homo sapiens seems to be the sole species capable of learning vicariously. In other words, although learning is theoretical without the experience to back it up, humans can and do adopt beliefs through inculcation and indoctrination. Every day, we assimilate or discard ideas we're exposed to, fitting them into our existing worldviews like puzzle pieces, or rejecting them altogether. Personal experience aside, the beliefs we vicariously assimilate or reject come from the countless sources listed above. Collectively, we call the sum of those influences our social conditioning. Surely you've begun to consider the ways in which story informs all these influences. It could be argued that every one of the above-cited conduits relies on narrative to a degree. Story is all around us. In everyday vernacular, we've all uttered or heard the phrase, "a tale as old as time." It's a likely story, and it's the story of my life. Most of us have referred to phrases or periods as, quote, chapters of our lives. Every day, publicists and public relations firms attempt to, quote, control the narrative on their clients' behalf. Spin doctors spin narratives, and dictators fabricate fanciful origin stories with a keen understanding of our human wiring for poetry and metaphor. As recently as mid-century, Kim Jong-il's birth, according to propaganda or legend, depending on one's views, took place on a sacred mountaintop, heralded by a swallow. Stories are so enduring that Americans who scarcely paid attention in history class can tell you that George Washington sported wooden teeth and once lied about chopping down a cherry tree. So enduring is the power of image that, true or not, the image of Benjamin Franklin's gold key being struck by lightning is just as vivid. Similarly shaky and enduring is the story of Isaac Newton being struck on the head by an impertinent apple. We can all picture it. Repeated exposure to images and ideas, both narrative and conceptual, has the power to familiarize or normalize, to demonize or ostracize. Let's take the phenomenon of diversity and inclusion of marginalized communities. In the media, representation and visibility play an undeniable role in normalizing, quote, the other, and diffusing tribal fear-based marginalization and ostracization. The stellar documentary, The Celluloid Closet, traces the history of LGBTQ representation in cinema. From the first motion picture captured by Edison on celluloid, in which two men dance to a phonograph, art has reflected life. The documentary follows the course of representation from that first grainy clip through the first same-sex kiss depicted in a silent film in 1927's Oscar-winning Wings, through the silencing and erasure of all things gay when the FCC introduced censorship during the Prohibition era. Only then were LGBTQ characters and images rendered conspicuously absent. Or better put, subverted. For several decades, art continued to reflect life. Only now gay characters were required to be sinister or creepy in some way. Think Norman Bates in Psycho or, well, anything from Vincent Price's filmography. Gay men were palatable as eccentric bachelors, novelties, or serial killers, so long as their orientation remained unspoken. These characters were the first to get their throats slit or be thrown out the window, as in Mel Gibson's Braveheart. The film's portrayal of Edward II was a typically homophobic caricature. The scene in which young Edward's father throws his limp-wristed lover from a high window to his death invited hurrahs from the audience. Throughout the film noir era, even overtly gay content like Tennessee Williams' critically acclaimed masterpieces had to be sanitized for the silver screen. His clearly gay characters became loners who frequented movie houses doing God knew what. In the case of Suddenly Last Summer, the omission of Sebastian's sexual orientation rendered the oft-mentioned procuring his mother did on his behalf confusing at best. Same with his ultimate demise at the hands of local street urchins in the town of Cabeza de Lobo, though this scene did succeed to symbolize Sebastian being devoured by his own demons. Art continued to reflect life, but only for those with a keen eye for reading between the lines. Unfortunately, the policy of keeping the love that dare not speak its name under the radar did more harm than good when it comes to acceptance. Silence speaks louder than words when gaps are filled in with innuendo and negative stereotypes. In the ultimate irony, Hollywood, or Tinseltown as it were, has been called the most homophobic place on earth. Film history bears this out, and not just in the decades of actors closeted for fear of missing out on roles, but in the skewed representations allowed to make it to the screen. One of the more comical examples of the persistence of life in art is that of Ben-Hur. The Celluloid Closet chronicles the production of the film, as well as the tactics of screenwriter Gore Vidal and director William Wyler. Apparently, Vidal envisioned a backstory between the character of Ben-Hur and his nemesis, Messala, one that explained their rivalry. Without telling Charlton Heston, the actor portraying Ben-Hur, Vidal and Wyler clued in actor Stephen Boyd, playing Messala, to a postulated love affair between the two rivals in youth. Stephen Boyd proceeded to play scenes with this backstory in mind, while the more conservative Charlton Heston remained clueless. It's comical to watch these scenes in retrospect, with subtext in mind. I was born in 1968, during the height of the sexual revolution. Despite that fact, and the fact I grew up in a strangely provincial town next door to Hollywood, gay images were few and far between during my upbringing. Oh, I knew that San Francisco was the gay Mecca, a place populated by men with bushy beards who wore sandals, which my dad referred to intermittently as hippie shoes or fag shoes. But San Francisco seemed theoretical and far away. I may have overheard the name Harvey Milk on occasion from the lips of an uncomfortable news anchor. But as far as I knew, he was the equivalent of the Tooth Fairy, and Anita Bryant was just the orange juice lady on TV. Once I put two and two together and figured out I was gay. Looking for role models was akin to searching for intelligent life on Mars. In the 90s, MTV would introduce America to a living, breathing gay man in his native habitat. The rare glimpses arrived in living rooms via Pedro Zamora, a participant in the third season of reality show The Real World. His existence would validate adolescents in cornfields in Iowa, starved to see themselves represented in the media and desperate for permission to be who they were. Their countless letters were testament to the power of visibility. Pedro was not only a gay man, but a Cuban-American minority living with HIV. But that impasse was decades off, on some distant horizon. For the moment, all I had to cling to in the late 70s was Three's Company's Jack Tripper, and he wasn't even gay. He was just pretending to be in order to take advantage of Santa Monica's rent control. For the moment, Liberace, Paul Lynde, and Captain Kangaroo were eccentric, quote, bachelors. And Bert and Ernie, of course, were roommates. When AIDS came along in the 1980s, the mainstream would be forced to acknowledge the community most impacted by it. Though it would take Reagan 5 years into both his presidency and the epidemic itself to publicly utter the term AIDS, the crisis would ultimately elevate the profile of the LGBTQ community. This would lead to more controversy and backlash, but eventually, through visibility, a modicum of normalization. Flash forward to Prop 8 and the years-long court battle for marriage equality. In between, here's what normalization looked like. A bevy of florists, caterers, or otherwise effeminate, eccentric neighbors flooded every last primetime television series. Carefully selected news clips highlighted leather-clad men grinding away on floats at gay pride parades. These images were rarely chosen for the merit of celebrating sexual liberation in defiance of the shame that has historically silenced the gay community. They were chosen for their shock value and novelty, further serving to alienate rather than normalize. At the risk of having my card revoked, I admit I found myself cringing throughout the 90s at these stereotypic representations. The very editorial choice of which images to include or exclude shouted volumes to me. At least the leather daddies in these news clips were not serial killers or ice cream truck drivers with twisty mustaches. I opted to count any visibility progress. When it comes to representation, the gay community is known to take what it can get. As a filmmaker and a member of the LGBTQ community, I've long been hyper-aware of its representation in cinema, hence my intimate acquaintance with the celluloid closet. For that matter, I have kept an eye on queer representation in every aspect of popular culture, from media and advertising to pop music and literature. The characters I saw in mainstream entertainment, even at the height of the aforementioned trend of representation in the 90s, were inevitably stereotypic novelties. I longed for the day the media would proffer not even positive representations, but accurate ones. I champed at the bit for a day when the sexual orientation of gay characters could be represented as a matter of fact, not a plot point. Couldn't just one of these characters be incidentally gay, rather than filmmakers having to explain their existence to audiences, to define them by what sets them apart? Couldn't queer characters populate stories without being the target of homophobia or contracting AIDS? In the true spirit of art reflecting life, even the real world's Pedro would go on to fulfill a persistent cultural narrative, that of gay man as tragic figure. In a poetic but telling twist, Pedro would die from AIDS complications, long after antiretroviral meds had begun to save lives. Though my own films strive for universality, I subscribe to the notion that one cannot separate the artist from the work when it comes to worldview. Further, I have occasionally written and directed overtly gay-themed films. This means I have subsequently navigated the queer film festival circuit more than once. There was a time when the programmers of these festivals catered to a ghetto mentality, adhering to a short list of usual suspects in their programming decisions. If a film did not feature coming out, marginalization, AIDS, or more fluffy, titillating fare like circuit parties or plenty of skin, there was no place for it in the program. Content has since broadened. Gay audiences now push to see themselves represented in every genre and format known to man, from hard-boiled detective stories to superhero epics. Traditionally, however, Queer content in the festival circuit was limited to a short list of identifying qualifiers. When it comes to films intended to, quote, cross over, content has traditionally been watered down to what is palatable for the mainstream. What makes it into the local cinema is what's safe. In the 90s, a string of mainstream features from major studios featured gay characters and storylines. Among them Philadelphia, In and Out, Threesome, My Private Idaho, Tu Wong Fu, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and The Birdcage. Throughout the decade, it was fashionable to feature gay characters and storylines in cinema, even sexual fluidity. But inevitably, gay-themed content existed to fulfill stereotypes or cultural narratives. In many cases, gay characters served to fulfill the rescue fantasies of the mainstream. In other words, in the same way promising football stars in underprivileged urban communities required a white woman to adopt them and pull them up by the bootstraps, insecure gay characters needed their heroic straight friends to rally around them and give them the courage and confidence to come out. In real life, it's precisely the opposite. Perfectly secure gay characters exhibit strength and courage by applying great patience, gently educating while observing the comfort zones and boundaries of the unenlightened. In the new millennium, films like Brokeback Mountain and Power of the Dog brought gay literature to the silver screen. But the gay roles were played by straight actors, who inevitably won industry awards for their daring performances, all while out-of-the-closet actors missed out on roles for fear the public wouldn't, quote, buy them as love interests in traditional leading roles. Further, both films mentioned above, while centering on gay male characters, were written or directed by straight white women. It seems the content is somehow more palatable that way. Billy Eichner, in publicizing 2022's gay-themed rom-com Bros, has speculated that there's a perception gay actors and filmmakers cannot be trusted with gay-themed material for lack of objectivity. No way around it. Bros was unapologetic, in your face. Billy Eichner's militant brand of comedy, rather than working politely with the system, shoves the gay experience down the audience's throats. It showcases the good, the bad, and the ugly in its unabashed representations. Time will tell whether this approach will prove off-putting or simply the equivalent of ripping off a Band-Aid. The upside is, the film has been billed as the first mainstream romantic comedy funded and promoted by a major studio, Universal. As a queer filmmaker, I know full well there have been countless gay rom-coms over the years, but they've most often qualified as one of two things: niche films intended for gay audiences, or in the case of those intended to cross over to the mainstream, independent films with private funding. In 2023, as made light of in Bros, even the Hallmark Channel has finally come around, catering to the pocketbooks of one of the most affluent demographics. The holiday rom-com Single All the Way featured what I've been waiting for all these years: matter-of-factly gay characters. Not only was the sexual orientation of its characters not a plot point, it was hardly acknowledged. In place of this distraction, universal thematic content had a place to land. In terms of positive representation, I cannot say enough about the potential effectiveness when not a single on-screen family member bats an eye at the protagonist's gender identity or sexual orientation. More than that, when friends and family champion that character's relationship goals and happiness the way they would any other character. Such images, though they shouldn't be, are progressive. The normalization of interracial relationships in the media has a similarly sluggish history. 1967's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, starring Sidney Poitier, was groundbreaking in its time. In the 70s, Middle America would have to reconcile a high-profile interracial marriage in the sitcom Good Times. But who would have guessed that in 2013, a 30-second Cheerios commercial would stoke controversy for its inclusion of an interracial couple? Recurring images with the power to normalize enrage those who wish to preserve the status quo. Normalization of LGBTQ images has long been framed by the right as the gay agenda. Even so, surely you see how recurring images, however slowly, can contribute to tolerance for diversity. Familiar tropes in pop culture, for good or bad, directly affect climate and policy. In 2015, the Supreme Court guaranteed marriage equality in all 50 states. It seems all those decades of normalization paid off. Sadly, as in the case of Roe v. Wade, policy can be reversed in the blink of an eye. 50-year-old rights and protections can be reversed. For that reason, we must remain vigilant in protecting human rights and personal liberty. Such is the nature of the pendulum swing. When the debate over marriage equality was playing out, through court rulings, legislation, protests, and demonstrations, it took me some time to join the fight. It's not something of which I'm proud. Simply put, I had long since mourned what was not on the menu for me. I simply was not invested in the issue. Call me complacent, or resigned. When I was born in 1968, the American Psychological Association still listed homosexuality as a disease. It would not be removed as such until 1979, right around the time I was going through puberty and discovering I was afflicted with said disease. For that matter, at that moment, information was sorely lacking. The only book 11-year-old me could find on the topic at the Burbank Public Library was a Freudian tome titled Preventing Homosexuality. It warned of overbearing mothers and distant fathers, as well as the danger of boys playing with dolls. The ominous prophecy for my life at the conclusion of the book was the characterization that gay men do not age well. Inevitably, unable to procure, they find themselves frequenting back alleys and dark, smoky clubs before dying alone. Thankfully, 11-year-old me had a well-honed bullshit detector. Recently, I ran across some old, grainy black and white propaganda films on homosexuality in an internet rabbit hole. I was shocked to find that the archaic tropes it proffered, those confounding homosexuality with child grooming and pedophilia, were generated and circulated during my time on the planet. The point is, things have come a long way. I never imagined for a moment same-sex marriage would even be on the table. It simply didn't occur to me. It was some version of the Stockholm Syndrome that blinded me to the inarguable rights at stake in Prop 8. The legislation sought to reconcile discrimination, a no-brainer in the land of equality. And still, it took me a hot minute to care. Though I eventually came around in principle, I understood that rights and privileges simply cannot be extended to some subsections of the population and not others. But as impervious to self-loathing as I fancy myself, I had been brainwashed by the status quo, like everyone else. By an unjust status quo. I see the Stockholm Syndrome at work everywhere, in ultra-conservative women who fight for patriarchal ideologies that directly oppress them, and in religious women who defend honor killings or genital mutilations under religious pretenses. The recent phenomenon known as quiet quitting has illustrated a profound sociological phenomenon. When faced repeatedly with futility, we resign. We throw our hands in the air out of self-preservation. This has startling implications. It's easy to see how witnessing images of mass shooting after mass shooting could desensitize, leading to apathy or indifference. Arguably, it already has. Even those who warn against climate change have become the equivalent of the boy who cried wolf. Miles to go before we sleep. My first two films as an auteur were ultra-low-budget films by SAG standards. Many independent films fall into this category. However, my third time out the gates, I garnered original screenplay credits and served as co-director on an independently financed feature with a decent budget. This was a first for me, as was spending $10,000 on a casting director. His normal fee would have been closer to $60,000, but a favor was pulled and I got the, quote, friend rate. The experience of working with a reputable and prolific casting director was eye-opening, to say the least. The caliber of actors to which we had access was a far cry from what one gets issuing an open call in Backstage West, formerly Dramalog. To this day, I am awed by the agency and command over craft exhibited by these professional actors. Some we cast were Oscar-nominated or otherwise household names. Just as eye-opening were some of the well-entrenched practices of the casting trade. Our casting agent expertly employed diversity and inclusion by calling in every type imaginable for roles, large or small, that did not specify ethnicity or nationality. I found myself awed by this awareness, as well as my own lack of imagination. As a co-writer, I'd never thought of certain roles as black or Latino. Why not, I thought. But I had to be nudged. Earlier, I mentioned the progressive representations in 2022's Bros and Single All the Way. Consider how relatively groundbreaking it was to feature matter-of-factly gay characters without their sexual orientation being a plot point. Now factor in the nonplussed attitude of the secondary characters and their unconditional support in the case of the rom-com Single All the Way for the happiness and well-being of the gay protagonist. Not only that, but the supporting characters champion these characters' love lives. Such images have the power to rewrite familiar cultural narratives and usher out obsolete thought forms. While this trend in positive representation is progressive by definition, there is plenty of work to be done. The majority of tropes prevalent in cinema can be thought of as more conservative. In other words, they reinforce existing norms, mores, values, traditions, and institutions. It's easy to see how overt, derogatory stereotypes can perpetuate societal ills like racism, bigotry, homophobia, or misogyny. Many such well-entrenched biases are expressly relied upon in propaganda. But what about the seemingly benign sentiments familiarized in everyday language that we accept as conventional wisdom? Pop culture and vernacular language is fraught with colloquialisms, expressions, and sayings that have an enormous impact on perception. These unexamined sentiments can prove empowering or limiting to an individual's fulfillment of desire. On the macrocosmic level, each has the capacity to fuel the march toward human potential, or to limit that potential. This book does not seek to remedy all societal ills. There are plenty of books and studies on the mechanics of institutionalized racism, bigotry, and homophobia. What I'm promoting in these pages is an awareness of the role story, both what we recognize as story and what flies under the radar as cultural narrative, in crafting universal thought forms. The call to action here is to recognize that storytelling in all its forms. I've compiled a list of seemingly innocuous everyday reflections that have an enormous impact on potential. I encourage you to look over this list of familiar thought forms and consider which category each falls into, empowering or limiting. Just as importantly, notice that many of the colloquialisms express sentiments that are polar opposites, proving once again that life is a Rorschach test, and we have the power to swap out the lenses through which we view it. The first two offerings on the list happen to be polar opposites. They also happen to inform everything from public policy and legislation to political ideology and institutionalized business practices. Consider the degree to which the concept of survival of the fittest has taken hold, especially in capitalist settings. The truth is, Darwin's writings included very few references to this notion. When he did mention it, the sentiment was more akin to survival of the most adaptable. Beyond that fact, the pre-existing ideas of evolutionary theorist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, largely overshadowed at the time, have been gaining traction of late. More and more, scientists are finding evidence of Lamarckian symbiosis and cooperation in our ecology, the very ecology after which capitalist societies model free enterprise. And now, the much-anticipated list. Feel free to add to it as you see fit. Life is a matter of survival of the fittest, competition. Life is a matter of symbiosis and cooperation. Resources are limited, scarcity, competition. There is enough to go around, sharing interconnectivity. God will provide, providence. No man is an island. It takes a village. Manifest destiny. Take the bull by the horns, carpe diem. There's no time like the present. If you want something done right, do it yourself. People are generally good. People are well-intentioned. People will rob you blind the moment you turn your back. All acts are truly self-serving. Sex is shameful. Love conquers all. Men cheat. Women are more humanistic than men. Boys don't cry. Sensitivity is weakness. We must pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. We must not cry over spilt milk. Women are more emotional than men. Men are controlling. Women are controlling. To err is human. Aging sucks. All that's guaranteed is death and taxes. Men are promiscuous. Gay men are the most promiscuous. Women are more nurturing than men. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Power yields corruption. Affluence equals corruption. Politicians are all corrupt. Politicians are public servants. The body declines with age. We have everything we need in our own backyard. Happiness is within. Money can't buy happiness. You can't take it with you. All good things come to an end. Hope springs eternal. You're nobody till somebody loves you. Vulnerability is weakness. Sensitivity is feminine. The arts are sissy. Progress is the root of all evil. Money talks. There is no free lunch. The best things in life are free. Your past always catches up with you. Life's a bitch and then you die. Life is what you make it. The world is your oyster. Shoot for the stars. Where there's a will, there's a way. Money makes the world go round. A world without pixie dust. The fulfillment of personal desire does not hinge on positive thinking, nor does cultural evolution require sanitization. I opened this book highlighting the materialistic slant to many contemporary schools of thought to do with the law of attraction and manifestation. I pointed out that the objective of well-being, contentment, tranquility, and inner peace need not be a foregone conclusion. There are plenty who subscribe to the sentiment that even if one chases said satisfaction, service and contribution seem to be the path to it, more so than the fulfillment of personal desire. Even so, there are few that would advocate martyrdom or sacrificing contentment for the cause of collective evolution. More than that, studies show that personal satisfaction and service through contribution are one and the same. But what about realizing potential as an end in itself? What if fulfilling purpose as one sees it is synonymous with realizing potential? What if we are wired, by the universe no less, to become the best versions of ourselves and pass that capacity on to future generations through epigenetics? Then it may be worth examining what hinders potential. In my own life, I've had a long history of rejecting Western notions of good, bad, right, and wrong. I understand such judgments as ego-based projections on otherwise neutral complementary forces. As an artist, I sing the praises of yin and yang, the beauty and decay, and embracing the poetry and melancholy. For me, stuffing away sadness or disillusionment is the equivalent of missing a spiritual opportunity. For that matter, in my writing, I've often disparaged the pleasure principle on which so many seem to operate for its lack of true principle. The preoccupation with what's pleasurable over what's morally right can have tragic consequences. And preoccupation with positive thinking, rose-colored glasses in the extreme, is often little more than the pleasure principle in disguise. Even so, despite rejection of value judgments, categorizing thoughts as positive or negative, despite my love for the shadow, I've come around, vibrationally speaking, that is. I know what toxic thoughts and the feelings that result from them feel like in my body. I've learned from experience to abide my emotional guidance system, to count my highly evolved limbic system a gift and trust my intuition. Bottom line, emotional stress equals inflammation, and inflammation equals disease. When it comes to health, fear-based responses to stressful conditions yield the cortisol and adrenaline that wreak havoc on the body. However virtuous it may seem to devalue personal contentment for personal contribution, one is no good to evolution once 6 feet under. In my own writing and image-making, I will continue to embrace the shadow. I will explore the good, the bad, and the ugly in the human condition. But with each piece I write, it's a decision to risk perpetuating my counterproductive personal narratives solely for the redemption at the end of the tunnel. I will beat the drums of human fallibility, the same frailties the Greek tragedies called out and that Shakespeare made, well, Shakespearean. But I will only dig in the dirt as catharsis, as therapy, in order to glean meaning and redemption. In the biology of belief, even Bruce Lipton warns of the limits of positive thinking. He posits that many who fail at it feel they have exhausted all resources in improving their circumstances or battling disease. Terms like tragic optimism and toxic positivity have emerged as backlash to the cult of positive thinking that has captured public imagination. Personally, though I see no harm in positive affirmations or mantras, I am more apt to rely on meditation to rewire counterproductive thought forms that thwart my growth. Disentangling familiar neural pathways not only cleans up the plaque that leads to Alzheimer's, it clears room for new, novel, and productive thought forms. Nurturing lifelong intellectual curiosity is the basis of brain plasticity. Trying to reverse counterproductive or limiting thoughts can feel like swimming upstream or pushing a boulder uphill. By contrast, looking forward by shifting focus to the creation of new territory has greater value. The goal of contribution is in keeping with the earlier suggestion. Focusing on the solution of a problem yields more results than perseverating on the problem itself. As an artist, though I say amen to the militant activists and those engaged in political persuasion, I've accepted that my sense of purpose lies in contributing through example and my creative efforts. Inspired work, a focus on creating the change one wishes to see in the world, like the positive images in the films I've mentioned, often enforces more change than harping about the world's problems ad infinitum. After all, it's hard to argue with Gandhi. Be the change you wish to see in the world. This chapter's focus on belief, as adopted through story and proffered by it, has led us to a discussion on empowering beliefs versus limiting beliefs. Let me qualify that this by no means correlates with censorship or sanitization. Art should continue to reflect life in all its colorful nuance. Earlier, I referenced Guillermo del Toro's masterpiece Pan's Labyrinth, and how audiences bristled at its graphic violence. I suggested that rather than serving as gratuitous titillation, and thereby serving to desensitize audiences to violence, disturbing scenes of the Spanish Civil War were germane to the thematic content del Toro sought to impart. Had audiences not suffered a modicum of what the protagonist did, the conclusion would not have been nearly so redeeming. The diabolical scenes were integral to the catharsis. I live in a world not populated solely by puppies, rainbows, and daisies, but balanced by the poetry and melancholy, the beauty and decay, and the promise of seemingly bleak, desolate images. I'm not sure I would want to live in a world without art, and art is subversive, often as not. It's provocative and disturbing and downright unpleasant at times. But its power to profoundly move humanity is what inspires me. In that spirit, I seek not to eliminate the unsavory, but to embrace and transform it. Not to sanitize the color, texture, and nuance from the world, but to shed light on, embrace, even elevate it to find the redemption. In that spirit, what I'm offering is an alternative to pursuing the elusive positive thinking that can be the equivalent of El Dorado. In the fulfillment of personal potential, individuals are better apt to transform counterproductive thoughts than to eliminate them, to root out contradiction and resolve cognitive dissonance, to reconcile conflicting thought forms and synthesize new ones that better serve their potential and that of humanity at large. I go back to Abraham Hicks' suggestion: more important than what we put in our bodies is what we believe about what we put in our bodies. The same goes for ideas, the stories we ingest. And reconciling contradictions in our worldviews starts with awareness. Earlier, I employed the metaphor of lens swapping to illustrate our agency to transform the world around us. The lenses we're talking about correlate with love and fear. Corny as it sounds, transforming the world is nothing more than making the choice to see all through the eyes of love rather than fear, to use our free will to generate a growth response in lieu of a protective response, in cell biology terms. Storytelling, as suggested earlier, hinges on fear and love, screenwriting in particular. We are invested in the goals of our protagonist. We hope she will accomplish her goal, but fear she will not. It could be said that every moment of our lives boils down to the same choice of lenses. We've all had the experience of framing an adversary as a villain. That supervisor who stood in the way of our promotion, or that neighbor who circulated damaging gossip in the fellowship hall at church. On a good day, we can see our adversaries as angels. who provided personal growth we would not trade for the world. We might even find compassion for them and see their humanity. Oh, it most often requires time and distance to see the opportunity in a crisis, or the humanity in someone we've framed as a villain, but the rewards are many when we do. The anatomy of belief. The breakdown of LGBTQ representation in film history I've offered in this chapter, however slow its arc, demonstrates the powerful role of media in normalizing through visibility and representation. Exposure to the images and ideas inherent in storytelling informs the paradigms that fuel social reform. The images we're bombarded with daily, tropes, archetypes, stereotypes, and cliches, either confirm and reinforce our existing beliefs or challenge them. They support our respective worldviews through confirmation bias or create cognitive dissonance that begs to be resolved. By synthesizing opposing thought forms, new paradigms are created, adding to the database of our personal value systems or worldviews. In this way, art and storytelling are potent catalysts for the growth and expansion that are synonymous with life. But let's take a closer look at how our personal, subjective beliefs become the societal norms that constitute cultural ideologies and establishments. How does the micro affect the macro? Abraham Hicks has described a belief as a thought one keeps thinking. Similar schools of thought characterize beliefs as familiar neural pathways that continue to fire unconsciously until disentangled through mantras, affirmations, or meditation. In former sections, we've identified heightened emotion as the qualifier for those experiences our brains flag for encoding or mapping on our worldviews. The survival-based responses to these experiences, stimuli or series of stimuli collectively called events, are thought of as either growth or protection responses germane to our survival. Fittingly, these responses correlate with the dichotomy of love and fear, the very tools of storytelling. The above-described database is largely unconscious, as are the knee-jerk fight-or-flight responses that arise in us when triggered. As discussed, innate response and practical life experience are augmented by the vicarious learning only humans are capable of, via social conditioning, inculcation, and indoctrination. Together, a rich tapestry of intertwining beliefs results. It's worth noting that in addition to the aforementioned fight-or-flight triggers, woven into the tapestry are neutral experiences and redeeming ones. Positive associations with our earthly encounters and experiences color the threads of life experience we call beauty, affinity, love, joy, affection, and bonding. Our entire aesthetic realm, arguably, is the product of positive experiences that elicit a growth response in lieu of a protection response. Here's the catch. Our beliefs about the world, rooted in past experience, determine what we see in it. As mentioned earlier, Einstein considered it a matter of urgency that we all ask ourselves, is the universe a friendly place? Our beliefs about the world are akin to goggles or lenses we wear that color all of our experiences. The colloquialism rose-colored glasses carries a negative connotation that disparages naivete and denial. But there's another way of looking at it. Another lens, if you will. Our beliefs about the world become expectations, and the universe expertly delivers according to our expectations. Harkening back to our chapter on archetypes, the genie archetype is symbolic in its granting of wishes, of the nature of the universe and the mechanics of manifestation. Ask and ye shall receive. Abraham Hicks offers that by beating the drums of our old, tired narratives and mantras, we are ordering more of the same. Manifestation of our desires happens when we focus on the solution to a problem and not the problem itself. Reciting a laundry list of grievances is the most surefire way to guarantee more of the same. As Esther Hicks puts it, what you put your attention on grows. Societally, fighting against rather than standing for something is often a dead-end road. The Just Say No campaign in the war against drugs beautifully illustrates the nearly exponential momentum that can result from negative attention. Similarly, the phenomenon of copycat behavior ensures that media attention to high-speed chases, school shootings, and even police brutality will guarantee their escalation. This is not to say that very real social issues should be ignored. Far from it. All forces, including subversive, militant, and civilly disobedient ones, conspire to forge lasting change. We must identify and diagnose societal ills in order to address them. But true social reform and paradigm shift most often results from solutions and not grievances, looking forward and not back. This truth may be at the heart of comparisons between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King in terms of societal impact. Henry Ford famously offered, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right." This sentiment speaks eloquently to the impact of belief on potential. It is well known that negative messaging in early development is internalized, stunting growth and potential. It is said that a child will become what you tell her she is. This sentiment plays out with nearly impeccable certainty. Individuals are born with unique temperaments and dispositions. Some are more likely to internalize negative messaging as self-loathing, while others possess the intrinsic value equivalent to Teflon. In psychology, individuals are thought to possess either an internal or external locus of control, accounting for a great deal of imperviousness or vulnerability. Early nurturing of self-esteem, environmental conditions, opportunity or lack of it, as well as countless other factors, play a role in the fulfillment of potential. In my own personal experience, though I often think of myself as needlessly subversive, a rebel without a cause, I am grateful for the Constitution that inclined me to question social conditioning the moment I came out of the womb. Having said that, it's difficult to parse the cart from the horse. As it turns out, being a gay man would require the intrinsic value that allows negative messaging to roll off and makes me unreliant on external approval. Wherever one lands on the locus of control spectrum, to whatever degree one internalizes social conditioning, not one of us is exempt from the power of belief. Whether self-generated or adopted hook, line, and sinker through socialization, our beliefs about ourselves and the world determine our capacity and our limitations. Our personal potential is bounded by what we believe we are capable of, and society's potential is governed by what we collectively believe humankind is capable of. Many bristle at the suggestion we create our own realities. The prospect of having to take responsibility for our circumstances and conditions is likely behind this resistance. Regardless, the mechanics of manifestation clearly have a mental basis. Forget about the mind-boggling philosophical implications of the observer effect in quantum mechanics. The understanding that any notion of a physical universe requires an observer. That principle alone supports in no uncertain terms that we, quote, create or experience the universe subjectively by reifying data. There are myriad other ways we, quote, create our own realities, all day, every day. Confirmation bias is alive and well, ensuring we take note of all that supports our existing beliefs, while overlooking all that challenges them. Add to the list the cherry-picking we all engage in daily as we share experiences, reciting the facts, figures, and even news stories with which we resonate. By repeating mantras and tired narratives, that laundry list of unsavory circumstances and conditions that accounts for our limitations, we reinforce them on our radar. By doing so, we prime ourselves to notice them as we go about our day. If our attention is on the kindness and generosity strangers are capable of, we will notice a selfless gesture when a neighbor pays it forward. If our attention is on the distasteful entitlement people are capable of, we will run into nothing but Karens in line at the supermarket. Our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, in short, our worldviews, are like lenses that color all perception. Past experiences and their resultant beliefs, as well as those internalized through inculcation and social conditioning, all ensure that we project and attribute all day, every day, on otherwise neutral events. In a strictly mechanistic sense, the fields of quantum mechanics, neuropsychology, medicine, and even cell biology support, at the very least, a powerful mind-body connection. There are infinite ways in which our beliefs dictate every aspect of our lives, from circumstances and conditions to our very health. Let's briefly identify the areas that constitute our life experience, or the quote reality we have the power to create through our beliefs. Michael Beckwith, thought leader and author of Life Visioning, has identified what he calls the primary life structures, Beckwith 2012. that must be nurtured for well-being, contentment, and satisfaction. Interpersonal relationships, livelihood, finances, beliefs, health, spirituality, community. To illustrate a point, let's pluck a few from the list, starting with finances. It's easy to see how our beliefs about money can affect our finances. If we adopt a scarcity mentality, moaning and groaning that there's never enough to make ends meet, we'll never get ahead. If we believe money corrupts or is the root of all evil, we may subconsciously sabotage our own prosperity and abundance. If we have negative examples in our own lives, evidence, we are further screwed on this front. At one point in my life, I looked around and saw that those with the freedom afforded by affluence had often exploited or stepped on others to get to the top, or privilege had rendered them out of touch, materialistic, and entitled over time. I came to recognize that although I manifested abundance in youth, I feared the capacity for entitlement in myself and began to self-sabotage. I'd have to repair my beliefs about money, reframing it as a spiritual currency that could allow me to be my best self, to rebuild a platform in which others could flourish and become better versions of themselves. I knew that, like all of us, I was at my best when I had the means to give. To turn things around, I had to choose what to focus on. I tuned out the models of materialism, consumerism, and blind privilege I found so distasteful, and focused on what I call luminaries. Women like Oprah and Ellen DeGeneres had built agency for themselves from nothing. The freedom and opportunity provided by wealth allowed them to contribute, to give back. To dig myself out of poverty, I had to rewire Protestant notions that spiritual growth requires restriction rather than expansion, self-deprivation rather than self-fulfillment, and minimalism rather than abundance. Another example that should resonate universally is how our beliefs about interpersonal relationships dictate what we attract, how our views on everything from gender roles to relationship models directly determine what we invite into our experience. It's easy to see how the simple adage, love conquers all, could go a long way in this context. Conversely, if Tina Turner has taught us love is a sweet old-fashioned notion, our base drives will dominate and erode faith. If a woman is taught that men are cheaters, she'll see evidence of it wherever she looks. If she's taught to simply look the other way at infidelity, she'll settle for it in her own marriage. To tie both finances and relationships together, consider the following adage popular in Chinese culture. Better to cry behind the wheel of a BMW than to smile on a bicycle. Materialistic mindsets vary from culture to culture, as do notions of, quote, marrying for love. Cultural relativity plays an undeniable role, considering that largely financial arranged marriages are not only a foreign concept in the Western world, but distasteful to many. When it comes to livelihood, Western European Judeo-Christian culture is fraught with conventional wisdoms about putting one's nose to the grindstone, the value of a buck, the merit in hard work, and the benefits of putting blood, sweat, and tears into one's chosen profession. At the same time, work as drudgery is clearly overrated in the eyes of those who believe we must reach for the stars. The land of opportunity is the poster child for dreaming big, starting with the American dream itself. This promise is voiced in Ford's earlier quote, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right." For that matter, Walt Disney emphatically insisted, if you can dream it, you can be it. Whether these distinctly American aspirational quotes are seen as endorsements of capitalism or human potential, one thing is clear. Views on vocation or earning a living run the gamut. Yet again, life turns out to be one big Rorschach test.
We want to take a moment to thank our wonderful listeners and supporters. Your continued support and sharing of our podcast helps us spread the transformative power of storytelling. If you enjoy our episodes, please rate and review us on your favorite platform and share the podcast with friends and family. For more enriching conversations and insights, subscribe to Language of the Soul podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media and visit our Patreon website for the latest updates and exclusive content. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to life. If you'd like to support us further, consider joining our Patreon community for exclusive content and donation options. Every bit of support helps us reach more hearts and minds.